This is Pastor Tim coming to you from Bend and Lomita United Methodist Churches in rural central Texas. We have been doing a series of podcasts on the great themes of the Bible, thinking that if you know the themes that are behind the Bible, you'd understand a little bit more what you're reading. I thought maybe we'd delve into what the Bible is and how it was put together, where it came from, and what kind of literature we have. That might be helpful. Let's talk about the Bible and where it came from. First off, the Bible was not something that somebody sat down and said, let's write something. It were stories that were told from generation to generation that would form the foundation of the culture, the Jewish culture. They talked about things in the past about Father Abraham and Moses and King David. They told those stories from generation to person, and there was an oral culture to it. It was not until later that they decided that they need to write it down. For one thing, they didn't have the means to write. And then most people were not literate, so they couldn't read either. So there was no purpose to it. But then along the Babylonian captivity, when the Hebrew people were taken into slavery, when the nation was overwhelmed by Babylon, and some of the scribes, some of the priests worried that being scattered among the Babylonians, that they would lose their faith, they would lose their culture, they would lose their traditions. So they began to write some of this down. But it's stories told they're writing down. So they did a lot of transformation, a lot of change over the centuries. And so when we come to the Bible, we find an ancient story has been written down later, looking back on the traditions of the Hebrew people. So the Bible is not one piece of literature. It's a bunch of books, both in the Hebrew and in the Greek versions for the Christians. And so when we begin to read it, we're reading a variety of authors, hundreds of authors, written over hundreds of years. So it becomes kind of difficult at times to understand the culture from 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years ago. And so sometimes we need help with that. And that's why we looked at to groups, to study in groups so that we can share our knowledge and share our experiences and come to understand what something means. It also means that we have to consult the people who study this for a living, who translate and look at the manuscripts and decide what certain words mean. Because not all words are translatable. For Hebrew, I remember that from Hebrew class that there are, I believe, 6 words for camel. We just have one. So when you have a fast-running female camel, we don't have a word for that. So you have to decide what those words mean. So the translators have to take the Hebrew from scraps of manuscripts that they have and figure out which one is the best and how to translate that. So it goes through a lot of processes. And so don't feel bad if it's sometimes difficult to understand. People have been trying to work on that for their whole lives, for hundreds of years. So the Bible is put together and decided. The Old Testament was decided. The list of the books was going to decide about the time of Jesus, and the list of scriptures for the New Testament was decided about 400 years after the time of Jesus. So some books were added and some books were taken away along the way. They were the books that were the most helpful to the people that were using them, the people of faith, to the priests, to the worshipers. So that's the way the Bible was written. It was not, I don't believe that God whispered into somebody's ear. He shared the experience, and which was told from person to person and then written down with people with limited ideas and limited vocabulary, it's impossible to talk about God with all understanding. We just do the best we can. And so that's what we have in the Bible. It is inspired by God so that it becomes a central book in our faith. It becomes a book that can generate faith by understanding who God is and what God is like. So the whole purpose of the Bible is to have an experience of God. So we should read it that way, open to what God has to tell us in it, but knowing that human beings over the centuries have written that. So that's how we're going to begin looking at some of the details, some of the books that are in the Bible, and some of the intentions of that, where there are stories, there's poetry, there's mystery, there's drama, there's wisdom. There's all those things in the Bible. And so we're going to discover some of those things together. I hope you'll come along with us. I'll see you next time.